Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Here, as always, with my co-host, Steve Flink. He has his Roland Garros warm-up jacket on. Very apropos with everything that's going on with the Olympics. Boy, am I looking forward to this episode, Mr. Flink. We had Rafa and Carlos playing together. We had Andy Murray's last match in doubles. We had Americans continuing to retire legends on the doubles court. We had Novak versus Rafa early in the tournament. But Steve, we must start with today's men's final. Novak Djokovic beating Carlos Alcaraz 7-6, 7-6. Two extraordinary sets. Novak has accomplished it all.
Yeah, that was the one missing link. He'd never been able to get out of the semifinals in 4 previous attempts, starting in 2008 at the Olympics. So this was enormously impactful to him and important to him. And yeah, he won in 2 tie breaks over Carlos. And remarkable thing is, especially on a clay court, no breaks in the entire match. It all came down to the 2 tiebreakers, and the king of tiebreakers prevailed.
Greatest tiebreak player ever, no doubt. No, that I don't think can be questioned by anybody. Let's get into it. And I saw something before the match started, and I saw the probability of the winner of this match. And it doesn't matter who the source was, and I don't know if it was a typo or not, but the probability had Carlos winning this match at around 69%. And when I looked at that, I said, whoa, this is not your regular clay court, even if it's a slam final. Novak is going to be super, super motivated for this. He wanted this so bad. 2 out of 3 sets. It was the only missing piece on his amazing resume. Carlos may have won it, but that percentage seemed way, way too high for me. You agree?
Oh, totally. I don't understand it. I'm wondering what 2 things. They either put a lot of stock in the straight set win that Carlos had 2-2 and 6 over Novak in the Wimbledon final, and the additional piece being that he kind of aggravated his knee again in the Tsitsipas quarterfinal here at the Olympics. And maybe they thought that could resurface, and that it didn't in the semis, but maybe they were putting some stock in that. I don't know, because logically, if you looked at that match going in, you would say what Novak said. Carlos is the favorite, yes, but more like 53-47, 52-48, somewhat close.
Yeah.
And so that surprised me as well.
All right, well, let's get into it. I mean, I don't know, but for me, it was incredible tennis, both sets. But the first set, there was that 4-4 game where I think Carlos had 4 break points. You can lead us up to that game or talk in detail about that game. That game was crucial for that first set.
Yeah, well, Novak had escaped 3 break points earlier. Now, when serving to get to 4-all, I mean, serving to forge ahead there and not fall behind the break and let Carlos serve out that set. Novak had 5 break points against him. It was
5. I said 4.
It was a 6-deuce game, and obviously he could not afford to lose it. And he, on all of the break points, David, what was impressive was that Novak, all the others, 4 of the 5 break, he was coming into the net. He either had a serve and volley where Carlos missed the return, a good move, and on the other times he came in and made clutch volleys, made an overhead. He was determined to come forward on almost all those break points, and so that made a big difference.
And Carlos was standing for the listeners who have not seen this match yet. I'm sure they'll watch it on replay. Carlos was standing very, very deep to return the serve, so it was a smart move by Novak to come.
Yeah, it was. And the thing is, Carlos was not going to change that. I know some people would probably be critical, but for whatever the reasons, he was obviously not comfortable, because we know about Carlos, David, that he's a very imaginative and clever and flexible player. He can do so many things on a court, and he doesn't always return from that far back. So there were reasons. We won't know the full story. Maybe he'll tell us at some point, but nevertheless, he was still reaching all those break points. There's still 6 deuces. It's almost a 14-minute game, like the long opening game of the Wimbledon final. So it was so crucial, because if Carlos breaks, he goes up 5-4 and serves for the set, and it might be an entirely different match. So that was a stupendous effort, I thought, from Djokovic to get that hold, because he took matters into his own hands and was very aggressive. And then a couple of games later, David, he's up six. He's held for 6-5 and has a set point.
Right, he had a set point at 6-5. That's right.
And Carlos, in typically composed fashion, body serve, forehand winner. He did a lot of that in this match. He was very smart, a lot of smart serving, which is why he was able to never get broken, because he'd go into the body on a lot of these big points and make it hard for Djokovic to get enough depth on his return. And then Carlos would step in and nail the forehand winner off Novak's return. So you would have thought, David, the reason I bring that game up is you would have thought that could have been jarring. Novak's had a chance to seal the set before the tiebreak, and now he's got to go to the tiebreak. And yet,
and they both had a lot of chances before the tiebreaks. I mean, Carlos was 0 for 8 on break points. Novak was 0 for 4. Plus, like what you just said, he had a set point at 6-5.
Yeah, actually, Novak was 0 for 6. It's amazing because he had a love 40 as well early that could have given him 3-1. So early on, it looked like he had the best opportunity. Then mid to late set, it was Carlos again before Novak has a set point. So you could say they each had every reason to believe they could have won the set prior to the tiebreak. But now it came down, maybe fittingly, given that they both had their chances, that it would come down to this tiebreak. And sure enough, they're on serve, and then Novak unleashes a forehand return winner, angles the return winner, that changed that whole tiebreak at 3-all in the opening set tiebreak. I mean, Carlos was right in there. And once Novak made the return winner, angled it away, the next 2 points, Carlos, I think, was a bit shaken, made errors, and then Novak came forward on set point at 6-3, got to a drop shot and steered it down the line, and then put away a forehand drop volley. So just like that, 3-all turns into 7-3 Djokovic in the tiebreak on a run of 4 straight points. And that was a 93-minute set. So you can only imagine why. There's Novak walking off to the locker room to take a bathroom break and change. And there's Carlos out there clearly agitated with himself, feeling like maybe he should have won the set. To me, it was a totally up for grabs set. I mean, as I say, they both had reasons to believe they could have done it sooner. But once again, it was Djokovic who gave nothing away in the tiebreak and came up with the one clutch return off the forehand side that gave him the mini break that carried him through the rest of the breaker.
I think his forehand today was more lethal than I've seen his forehand in a lot of previous matches, especially this year. I think Novak really looked to attack with his forehand, and it paid off huge dividends in today's match.
No, I agree, David. Just to add to that, I totally agree that maybe it hasn't been quite up to par this season. In 2023, it was one of the chief reasons why he won 3 of the 4 majors, that he was really going for that forehand. And today, I think he felt like he had no choice against Carlos. If he was a little bit passive, Carlos was going to make him pay a substantial price. So I think there was a reason. That was definitely what was great about it, was he missed so little. Yeah. It's one thing when you're going for the forehands, and Carlos can have moments, as you know, and he did in the first set, where he overcooks the forehand and hits it 3 feet long because he's just trying to be almost a little bit too macho. While Novak measures it so well that he's hitting it hard, but he's still hitting it with great controlled aggression. That's what I loved about it today.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then the second set, again, no breaks to serve. And I've kept saying to myself as we got to the latter stages of the second set, in my opinion, I'm eager to hear what you're thinking. I'm like, if Carlos could sneak out this second set, I think obviously the momentum would be on Carlos' side. But even with Novak being super motivated, I think Carlos wins that third set if it goes 3. Thankfully, if you're in Novak's camp, it did not.
Interesting point, because it came up with the commentators too, with Mary Carrillo and Renee Stubbs. And Mary was thinking the same thing. God, if this goes 3, surely the kid will win. And Renee countered in a very respectful way, saying, yes, but Novak wants this so badly.
So bad.
So I think the third set could well have ended up being they would have been exhausted by the end. Right. Could well have gone down the wire again, 7-5 or 7-6, to tell you the truth. So we'll never know. But I think Novak, from the standpoint of stamina, but when you're in a close match like that and you have a chance to wrap it up in straight and you believe in your prowess in tie breaks, you don't want to let that go. So, and obviously it weighs on Carlos, knowing he absolutely has to win this breaker or he's lost the match.
Right. I mean, 7-6, 7-6. We've said it at the beginning. Greatest tiebreak player. It's amazing to me that when you go back, Steve, to the 2023 Wimbledon final, when Novak blitzed Carlos in that first set 6-1, the second set, Carlos won that in a tiebreaker. And if you remember, Novak was on an incredible tiebreak streak that summer in 2023. Carlos won that tiebreaker, his second set in 2023. Most recently at Wimbledon, the third set, when Carlos was up 2-0, 5-4, 40 love, Novak comes back. Carlos gathers himself, wins another tiebreaker against Novak. So Novak, most incredible tiebreak player ever. To do this today against a guy who has confidence knowing that he can beat Novak in tiebreaks when basically the rest of the entire field does not. They know they are, and when they head into a tiebreaker, they are at a distinct disadvantage against Novak Djokovic.
I agree. Carlos, because he knows he's great in tiebreaks. He's great in fifth sets. He has some of the same kind of strengths of character and playing under pressure that Novak does. So you're right. He goes in there. But on the other hand, he's lost the first set breaker. And now it's do or die in the second set breaker. And the other thing I want to add to your comment about the 23 Wimbledon final, which made that so remarkable, is Novak had set point in that second set tiebreak and missed a routine cross-court backhand into the net tape. Probably a shot he'll never forget, because had he made that shot, had he won that point and gone up 2-0, Carlos won't quit, but both players agreed it would have been extremely difficult for him to come back. But you're right. Carlos has the right mindset, so he's not going into the tiebreak thinking, how do I beat Novak in one of these? But he is thinking in the second set tiebreak, I better produce now. And I know he also knew, I'm sure he's saying to himself, I know Novak is not going to give me anything, just like he didn't in the first set tiebreak. There will be no unforced errors. It will not happen. And by my count, Novak didn't make an unforced error in either of these tiebreaks. Carlos forced a few, but there were no unforced. And then, of course, once again, Djokovic, in the middle, it's 2 points. He had the early mini break, David, 2-0, played a great forehand cross-court winner on the first point, won the second with defense, and then Carlos brought it back to 2-2. But then again, that's where it changes again, because once more, a spectacular forehand cross-court winner from Novak on the stretch takes him to 3-2. Never look back, because this time, similar to the first set, now he wins 5 points in a row from 2-2 in the second set tiebreak, and that winning forehand that put him up 3-2 was the difference, because he then came forward, put away an overhead, nice inside in forehand that allowed him to come forward to put away an easy overhead, and then from 4-2, Carlos made two errors that were not really typical of the match, I wouldn't say. I think he was suddenly feeling it. He was feeling the pressure and knew how close Novak was. And he kind of gave away those 2 points with surprising errors. And then Novak closes it out in style at 6-2 with a forehand inside in winner. But once again, Djokovic, Carlos knew he had to earn every point. He just got outplayed in both tiebreaks, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and Carlos admittedly said so. So that's right, Steve.
Yeah, not that he was terrible, but it finally got to it. He finally looked a little human. I didn't think he looked too human up until he made those 2 errors to go down 6-2 in the second tiebreak, because he's so cool under pressure, and he was so magnificent in the way he was erasing break points against him almost casually with kick serves followed by forehand winners. So listen, I think considering what was at stake, David, that this is an Olympic gold medal match, that it's so much riding on it for both players, because Novak doesn't want to lose to him again after being beaten in the Wimbledon final. It's a good response, similar to me to last year, by the way, where he's lost that 5-set final that you just alluded to Carlos. They go to Cincinnati, they play a 4-hour match, and Djokovic rallies from match point down in the second set tiebreak to win it in a third set tiebreak. And then he ended up beating him again at the year-end championship. So, it was important to him on a personal level, but more importantly, to get that gold medal, no matter who he beat. He just, after all of those, it goes back to 2008 when he lost to Rafa in the semifinals on an errant overhead near the end. 6-4 in the third to Rafa in the Olympics in 08. And then he lost to Murray in 12, and he lost to Delpo early in 16. He drew him in the first round. And then the last time he was up a set and 3-1 in the 2020 Olympics, which was played in 2021 because of COVID. And Zverev won 7 or 8 games in a row from 3-1 down in the second set and beat Novak in the semis there. So he had so many memories of that. And that, by the way, he admitted was on his mind, all those semifinal losses when he was playing Musetti in the semis this time. And he lied down on the court after the match, sprawled out on the court the way he usually is after winning the title. But he was so relieved to get past the semifinal syndrome and put himself in a position to play for the gold.
He wanted this so bad. And that's why I said you can throw out some of the stats. You can throw out percentages. You could throw that all out the window. He had not won a title this year. Novak had not gotten to a final. It didn't matter. He wanted this so bad. And, again, only 5 singles players to win all 4 majors plus an Olympic gold. That's Steffi Graf, who did that all in 1 year. Incredible. Andre Agassi, Serena Williams, Rafa Nadal, now Novak Djokovic. Also, only 2 men who did that, and an ATP finals. That was Novak and Andre. Obviously, Novak has all the numbers as far as slams and whatnot. Incredible. Before we move on, what else do we want to talk about before we move on to other topics?
Look, it was a monumental match in his mind. He said something that I think was revealing. That's where I wanted to tack on to what you just said. He made a comment the other day, early in the tournament, and then he kind of reiterated the same comment after the semifinal win over Musetti, which was that he didn't feel as well prepared for Wimbledon, given the rush that he had with after the knee surgery to get back in physical sync as he did here. He felt he was much better prepared. And then he also said prior to Carlos, he felt more confident about his chances. He said, yes, Carlos is the favorite, but I feel more confident about my chances to win this match than I did coming into the Wimbledon final. Thought that was very revealing, and he proved it today.
Steve, let me ask you this, and this is if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would not have predicted this. Carlos has beaten Novak twice at Wimbledon, and Novak has beaten Carlos twice, once at the French Open, now once at the Olympics, same surface, Roland Garros. A couple of years ago, myself or a lot of others would probably reverse that.
True. No, you're right. Obviously, it's circumstances too. Novak should have won the Wimbledon final a year ago and just didn't play nearly well enough this year, and Carlos was in the zone. And then as far as Roland Garros, the 2 matches there at the semifinals of the French a year ago, and now this one in the Olympics. The first time at the French, as you know, Carlos was cramped all over his body. So a match that was highly competitive where they split the first 2 sets, I still would have liked Novak's chances the way he was playing, but Carlos was in terrible shape the third and fourth. Then you take today, just a very well-played match, maybe the best 2-set match I've ever seen in men's tennis. And Carlos played really well today by comparison to that other cramping episode he had a year ago at Roland Garros, but it wasn't quite good enough to get him the win. You're right. To get back to your original point, it's true. You wouldn't figure that way. And Novak made that comment a year ago at Wimbledon after he lost him the first time. I knew how great you were on all the other surfaces, but I didn't know you could play this great on grass. It was a compliment. So you're right. But the fact is, they are the 2 best by far all surface players in the sport. Djokovic has demonstrated that for a long time, and he now has 3 French Opens. And the clay is supposed to be his worst surface, and he's had a lot of success on clay now with Olympic gold medal and another title on the same court at Roland Garros. And then you take Carlos, who's just so flexible and so versatile that it didn't take him long. It took him till last year to figure out the grass by winning at Queens before Wimbledon and then going on to take the title there. So I guess what it comes down to is they're both just great all surface players, and either one can beat the other on any kind of court.
Well said. I agree. All right. For us Americans, I can tell you this: Jack Sock, Francis Tiafoe, who else do we got? Tommy Paul, Taylor Fritz, Rajiv Ram, and Austin Krajicek are not making many friends if for tennis fans in general with retiring legends on the doubles court, right, Steve? I mean, Francis and Jack beat Rafa and Fed in Laver Cup. You got Tommy Paul and Taylor beating Andy Murray and Dan Evans in Andy Murray's last match. And then you have Rajiv and Austin Krajicek beating Carlos and Rafa. What was your take? And maybe they're going to play Laver Cup together again, but Rafa and Carlos, how fun was that to watch?
No, it was great. And you kind of felt it might catch up to them. And it did when they played Rajiv and Krajicek, and that there's just two superb doubles. Rajiv is one of the great doubles players of this last 10 years, and he's been terrific. So it caught up to them in that they were good enough to beat some of the other teams based on their singles ability and somehow gelling on the doubles and Rafa's experience. But once they came up against one of the really most formidable clay court doubles players in Rajiv, then that was too much. But it was great to see them win a few rounds. And same with Andy.
Saved 5 match points in his first round, right?
And a couple more in the next round. I think it was a total of 7. And they got through the 2 matches, and finally it was up to the Americans to beat them. But I thought it was very well handled, David, that they were not too celebratory, Fritz and Paul. They were very low key about it, and they hugged Murray at the net and got off the court, and there was no raised arms because they thought it was Murray's moment, and they were right. It was. And the crowd was responding more to Murray saying goodbye than they were to the Americans being victorious.
I do want to hit real quickly, just because it was done a while ago, but, Rafa and Novak, they not a lot of times when they play in the second round of any tournament. Obviously with Rafa not playing a lot. I said this to you, and I'm not saying this would have altered the outcome at all, but I said this to you and other people. Rafa had played doubles on Saturday, a 3-setter on Sunday, and then Novak on Monday. Novak had basically played a practice match on Saturday versus Matt Ebden versus shout out Matt Ebden. He hadn't played a singles match in like 2 years, but he did win the doubles in goal. We all know how good he is in goal. I thought it was going to be extremely difficult for Rafa to beat Novak, even if he did have as much rest as Novak had, but playing 3 days in a row, especially with the 3-setter late, it was stacked against him from the outset as far as recovery time goes.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think that it's sort of, you look at the pattern, look at Rafa losing to De Minaur in his first clay court tournament back, and what happened after that, and getting beaten once by Hubie pretty badly, and losing to Zverev in straight sets at the French, that when he's coming up against the very best, like he'd been in that clay court final in Sweden, made the final, it was a monumental effort to do that against much lesser players, but when he's coming up against the best, right, it's a little too much for him. Now, having said that, Djokovic is beating him to a pulp. He's up 6-1, 4-love. It looked to me like a 1-1 match coming up, or maybe 1-2 at worst. And Rafa managed to win 4 games in a row to get it back to 4-all, and they had a long game on Rafa's serve, and Rafa almost got back from 15-40 before Djokovic eventually broke him and then served out the match. So it was nice in a sense that he could restore it. It made it a bit more respectable from his standpoint, a little less humiliating, but a well-deserved win from Novak, who had clearly outplayed him, and Rafa acknowledged it afterwards. So it looks like the career series will end at 31-29 Djokovic, which is one of the great rivalries of the Open era, without a doubt. And too bad this was not one of their epics. This was not like say the 5-set semifinal they played at the French Open, 9-7 in the 5th to Rafa back in 13. Not one of those, or one of their great Australian Open epics too. But it was nice, still nice to see them on the court, and maybe for the final time, very likely for the final time.
2 players I do want to mention. They didn't medal, but I think they've continued to play. One player is continuing to play at a high level. Another player, we're happy he had a good tournament. We'll start with Felix Auger-Aliassime beating Daniil Medvedev, and then Casper Ruud. We've been searching for Felix, and I think Felix has been searching for that level as well. This may give him some confidence in the next couple tournaments that he plays before New York. And then Tommy Paul, he just keeps running into Carlos Alcaraz, but Tommy Paul continuing to play at a high level.
Well, yeah, let me just comment first on Tommy, since you mentioned him last. Yeah, he played another fine match against Carlos. He was almost up. He lost the first set 6-3, but he was almost 2 breaks up in the second, had break points to go up 4-love, and then eventually served for the set, couldn't close him out, and then eventually had a set point in the tiebreak before he lost. So it was nice to see Tommy once more really challenging Carlos. And, that to me was great to see it. He's just having a great season all around.
Agree. And
now,
Felix,
as for Felix, those were 2 terrific wins. Medvedev has been at a match point against him in Australia. By and large, it's been a terrible rivalry for Felix. And yet he beat him in straight. And so Daniel's woes continue. And then to back it up by beating Ruud, Felix should feel very good about that. Now, he then lost pretty badly. He had scheduling difficulties with a late mixed doubles that carried him the night before he played, that he lost to Carlos 1-1. Disappointing that the scoreline was so decisive. It was unlikely he was going to beat him on clay, but I would have been hoping for more like a 3-4. But nonetheless, and then he loses a good, well-played 3-setter to Musetti for the bronze. But you're absolutely right. Felix needed a showing like this. This could carry him over onto the hard courts, where I'd like to see some good things from him at the U.S. Open, and then definitely the end of the season where he can be at his very best indoor hard. So it's a good sign, because when he's playing well, he's one of the most, beguiling players to watch out there on the tour. So I was happy to see a very good showing from Felix.
And staying on that trend, that positive trend with Felix, let's go to D.C. and let's talk about the hometown kid there, Frances Tiafoe. Oh, sorry.
David, I'm sorry. Before we go to D.C., I just wanted one shout out to Musetti. Musetti lost that well-played 5-setter to Novak at Roland Garros. Then surprisingly went to the finals of Queens, the semis of Wimbledon, got to another final after that. He has been on such a great run. He's just a completely different player and person right now in his expectations. So not only did he play much better than the scoreline shows when he lost to Novak 4-2 in the semis, and much better. First set in particular was much higher quality than the score would indicate. But then he goes out and wins the bronze over Felix. So I feel like he's really on his way maybe to the top 10. I just wanted to make that point before we go to Washington.
Yeah. No, incredible. He's right on there too, with Felix doing good work at the Olympics. Musetti's been having an incredible couple weeks, months. And then I wanted to talk about Tiafoe down in TC. He lost to Sebi Korda in the quarters last night, but he had a good week, including beating Andre Rublev. Steve, he likes that match against Rublev.
He does, yeah. He's beaten him a couple of times at the Open. It's interesting. You would think at the very least it would be back and forth, and that Rublev would be getting his share of hardcourt wins over Francis. But yeah, maybe it's getting a little bit into Rublev's head. But also, it's two things. Maybe Francis was due for a win like that and needed it, and it was timely. Plus, Rublev has not had a good year. Things have not been going terribly well for him, with exception of one great week over in Spain. So I feel like maybe he's still a little vulnerable and he's beating himself to a degree, but that was a win despite then getting handled by Korda. Tiafoe now I want to see what he'll do in the next couple of events, Canada, Cincinnati Open, maybe ready for another big Open, because we've seen him in the semifinals there. 2 years ago, he lost to Carlos in the semis in 5.
Yep. 3 out of 4 Americans in the semis in DC: Shelton, Korda, Tiafoe. Shelton lost in 3 sets to Cavalli last night. And what's interesting, we talk about this in tennis all the time, sometimes you feel like you shouldn't get through an earlier match, and when you do, you're playing a little bit with house money. Cavalli saved 5 match points versus Davidovich Fokina in round 3. Korda saved 2 match points versus Thanasi Kokkinakis in round 3. Kokkinakis had a sitter on 1, and Korda, almost like self-defense, just kind of slapped with it, wound up going in to save 1. The second match point, Kokkinakis missed a pretty easy backhand volley. Korda gets through that, and as we speak, he's playing in the final right now versus Cavalli. So this sport is interesting. You just got to somehow get through, and you never know where the week's going to end.
Yeah, listen, it's true. The 2 women's finalists at the Olympics too, they each are saving match points early on. So it's like, that's not uncommon these days. That there's such, the playing field is so level that but if you can survive one of those harrowing skirmishes like that, then there is a chance to just put it behind you and go all the way.
Yep.
So, but I am impressed that Korda looks healthy this week. I hope that continues because he could also be quite a significant performer in the weeks ahead, right through the U.S. Open.
His dad, Peter Korda, won this same tournament in 1992. So it'll be interesting if Sebi can do it. One match on the women's side in DC that I don't know had a lot of people's eyes on it, but it did for me because I think there's a potential for this matchup to be played in the future in later rounds and slams. And that's Emma Raducanu, who beat Peyton Stern 7-6, 6-2. It was pretty early in DC. I think both of those players, I've talked about Peyton for a while now. That's a match that if both those players continue positive developments in their game, that could be a round of 16 match in a slam and not in a not too distant future.
Yeah, Emma, I mean, listen, it's different circumstances. Stearns is a young player. Just everything has been going largely her way. She believes in herself. She's exciting to watch. She's on her way. Raducanu is trying to be on her way back and seems to be. I'm encouraged by that because I still say, no matter what anybody wants to say critically of her, if you can win the U.S. Open with 3 qualifying wins and 7 in the main draw without losing a set, you're worthy of that title. And she did that. And I feel like now it's coming around for her again. And I'm delighted to see. And the other one I'm happy to see on the upswing again is Paul
Badosa.
Paula Badosa really playing well again. She seems healthier. She's had a lot of physical woes. So I'm looking for big things from Badosa as well.
And Toronto this week, there's an interesting first round match. Ons Jabeur plays Naomi Osaka. Potential second round match between Peyton Stearns, who we just mentioned, and Madison Keys. So those two will be good. Yannick Sinner back playing this week in Montreal. We have Cincinnati the following week. And before we know it, the U.S. Open will be upon us, Mr. Flink.
Yes, absolutely, David. Just a brief word about Sinner. The poor guy, we saw that he was struggling at Wimbledon, David, when he played Medvedev. Now, Medvedev played a great match. I don't want to take anything away from him. He ended his 5-match losing streak and deserved the win in 5 sets. But there were dizzy spells there going on for Sinner. He was despondent afterwards. He didn't really know what was wrong with him, what had brought it on. Then he's practicing for the Olympics, and I guess he had some similar kind of dizzy spell. They checked him out. He had tonsillitis. So he has to miss the Olympics. So I sure hope that this poor guy is able to be physically right in Canada, and there will be no Alcaraz, no Djokovic. So, and that's not to say he sweeps through the field because they're not there, but it's a chance for Sinner to sort of reestablish himself in a way and at least get on a healthier path leading up to the Open. He should at the very least get a lot of matches in Canada, and he should have even a decent shot at the title.
Well said. Well, with that, I think we covered it, Steve. Congrats again, Novak Djokovic. Unbelievable, just unbelievable.
And by the way, that's career title number 99. So he's closing in on another milestone. The next time he wins a tournament, it's going to be the magic 100.
Thanks everyone for listening. This was a lot of fun, and we'll be back at it next week covering both Toronto and Montreal. Thanks again, Steve. I know you enjoyed this as much as I did.
I did. Thanks, David.